d'intégration, nous allons démarrer nos travaux. Alors, nous allons démarrer par la partie protocolaire, à savoir l'ouverture de notre session. Et après la cérémonie d'ouverture, nous allons marquer une pause pour pouvoir engager les consultations devant conduire à l'élection du nouveau bureau. Le bureau qui va diriger les travaux de notre 9e session. Alors, sans plus tarder, je le disais, sans plus tarder, nous allons passer la parole au directeur de la division de l'intégration régionale et du commerce.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My sister and my friend, Ms. Tresha Mapanga, our Director for Trade and Industry at the African Union Commission, distinguished delegates of member states, regional economic communities, ladies and gentlemen. Let me welcome you all to Addis Ababa and also to this 9th session of the Committee on Regional Cooperation and Integration. Let me also take this opportunity to pay particular tribute to the government and the people of Ethiopia under the able leadership of His Excellency Prime Minister Desalegn Haile Mariam for their immense efforts in establishing the economic, socio, cultural, and Pan-African environment that has made it possible for Ethiopia to continue to become an important epicenter of dialogue between and among Africa's leaders, policymakers, and experts on critical development issues of interest to our continent. Let me also thank Madam Tresha Mapanga for her presence and also for the excellent collaboration we continue to benefit from her personally, from her department, and from the African Union Commission in general on our work in support of Africa's development, trade, and regional integration agenda. We also recognize and commend the presence in this meeting of eminent functionaries and experts from member states, regional and sub-regional institutions. Partnerships are a critical part of implementing our agenda on trade and regional integration, and so in this regard, we do immensely appreciate the support and the partnership from our development partners. Mr. Chairman, distinguished delegates, as your Economic Commission for Africa, we are honored to be hosting your 9th session under the theme of enhancing productive integration for Africa's transformation. As you know, your committee is one of the key ECA's subsidiary bodies which review developments and issues in their respective sectoral areas. This particular Committee on Regional Cooperation and Integration was established by Resolution 827, paragraph 32 of the Joint African Union Economic Commission for Africa Conference of Ministers. The committee meets on a biannual basis at ECA to review the work program, the work undertaken in the biennium under sub-program 2 on regional integration and trade. The objectives of the meeting are to review and deliberate on developments in specific sectorial areas and make recommendations which will guide the ongoing work on regional integration and trade under the sub-program. The theme of your 9th session is enhancing productive integration for Africa's transformation. As you know, the quest for Africa's structural transformation compels our countries to lay a solid foundation for industrial development and integration at the sub-regional and regional levels, and achieve a significant level of world production in such key products as agricultural inputs, as well as intermediate and capital goods industries, especially those intended for other industries and infrastructure building. This means that the industrial development and integration process has to target the establishment of important industries. Furthermore, and as we continue to stress and emphasize over and over, instead of exporting raw materials in an unprocessed form, processing, upgrading, and diversification of products will ensure a maximum utilization of the indigenous factor endowment stroke natural resources that are abundant in our continent. Now, you will agree with me, distinguished delegates, that structural transformation and regional integration in Africa go hand in hand. The former is not possible without the latter. The good news is that the integration of Africa is keenly being pursued not as a zero-sum game, but as a development strategy intended to benefit all of Africa. Taking into account the comparative strengths and endowments of countries in natural and other enabling resources and infrastructures, and existing and potential linkages of these resources across national frontiers, an industrial development and productive integration strategy can only help trigger an expansion in our regional and continental markets and promote linkages between and among various industrial subsectors and between industry and other sectors at both the national and regional levels. And as we make steady efforts towards establishing the continental free trade area of goods and services by 2017 indicatively, it is high time we also paid much greater attention to boosting our industrial and manufacturing capacities individually and collectively to make the CFTA of goods and services more tangible and meaningful. It is against this background that the theme of this ninth session is particularly significant and timely. And so, distinguished delegates, allow me to dwell a bit more on this issue. What is really meant by productive integration, and why is it important? Productive integration means developing and linking regional production and value chains in Africa. Intra-African production linkages through a conscious development, modernization, and diversification of productive capacities, coupled with the boosting of intra-African trade, cross-border investments, and infrastructure networks of roads, railways, telecoms, and energy across the continent would be key drivers of a truly integrated continent, and indeed, Africa's transformation. We are proud, and rightly so, to see our African economies growing at an impressive average rate of over 5 to 6% over the past decade. The dynamism of Africa's economies has actually captured the imagination of the world. You all know, and we have seen, that Africa is now being courted by powerful global players with a keen interest in its natural resources and untapped market, with a growing and youthful population and an expanding middle class. The narrative of a rising Africa is the result of years of hard work and better macro management. Indeed, the economic revival of the continent is attributed to improved economic and political governance, relatively stable and peaceful climate, increasing foreign capital inflows, especially foreign direct investment, and improvements in the business climate. The continent also benefited a great deal from an upward trend in commodity prices over a considerable period of time that was backed by an increasing global demand. According to the 2015 Mutual Review of Development Effectiveness Report, which is produced jointly by the Economic Commission for Africa and the OECD, there has been significant progress on the part of African governments in delivering their commitments to improve political and economic governance, increase domestic resources mobilization, as well as improving human development dimensions. The glowing narrative of a rising Africa, an African Renaissance, should nonetheless be nuanced because invariably the growth experienced so far on the continent has not been generally transformative. Economic growth alone is a necessary but not a sufficient condition for structural transformation, and broad-based and inclusive development that is also germane for the attainment of peace and stability in Africa. Growth also needs to generate employment, strengthen social cohesion, and inclusiveness. And Africa's own Agenda 2063 embodies this vision of transformative growth. What is therefore needed now is that this economic momentum provides the springboard for structural transformation to ensure a sustainable and inclusive development path for the current and future generation. Now, the region's enormous potential for labor-intensive industrialization is also being demonstrated through, for instance, Chinese and other manufacturers that are increasingly investing in countries such as Ethiopia, taking advantage of low labor costs. Industrialization is already happening, but it needs to happen faster. Currently, fewer than 10% of African workers find jobs in manufacturing, and among those, only a very tiny fraction of as low as 1/10 are employed in modern formal farms with adequate and modern technology. Private investment in modern industries, especially non-resource tradables, needs to increase to sustain structural transformation. As in all developing countries, farmers in Africa are flocking to the cities, but many do not end up in modern manufacturing industries as they did in East Asia. But what we are witnessing is that they are ending up in services such as retail trade and distribution, which are not technologically dynamic in the continent and have been falling behind the world frontier. Our regional integration agenda provides us with enormous opportunities to foster productive integration beyond the huge investments we have made in consolidating our trade and market integration, including the establishment of the COMESA, SADC, EAC Common Free Trade Area, and the current efforts to fast-track the establishment of the Continental Free Trade Area in 2 years' time. This calls for promoting inter-industry linkages among African countries and taking advantages of economies of scale and economies of complementarity. The development of regional supply chains in production will only be possible if the integration agenda is pushed forward and the remaining barriers to intra-regional trade are removed. Also, infrastructure connectivity, such as in transport and logistics, is an important vehicle for the creation of regional value chains. Now, in this regard, it is important, distinguished delegates, for us to emphasize on the critical importance of the agricultural sector in our Africa's quest for accelerated structural transformation. As you all know, the sector has a dominant role because it employs at least 2/3 of our population, and so the role of agriculture and land policies remains very crucial. No country has been able to sustain a rapid transition out of poverty without raising productivity in its agricultural sector. This, of course, is done through a combination of many factors, including sound land policies. The process involves structural transformation where agriculture, through higher productivity, provides food, labor, and even savings to the process of urbanization and industrialization. A dynamic agricultural sector raises labor productivity in the rural economy, pulls up wages, and reduces poverty. Africa also needs to integrate into the global value chains. This is because the global value chains offers new opportunities for structural transformation. African countries, as you know, can integrate as links into these global value chains at a specific stage, usually assembly in manufacturing and commodity production in agriculture. And although at 2.2%, Africa's total global value created under the global value chains remains very small, we know that Africa's participation growth rate has actually been high. The participation in the value chains opens potential opportunities to upgrade through knowledge transfers, product differentiation, and the addition of adjacent stages of the value chain. The challenge for African countries is to industrialize and increase their participation to the value chains while not becoming locked into performing low value activities. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, structural transformation through productive integration and industrialization in general will also require us to pay particular attention to the imperatives of climate change. As you all know, recent warming of the planet is very alarming, given that Africa is among the most vulnerable regions to the climate change phenomena. Therefore, climate risk management will become a more and more important element of development planning on our continent, particularly in areas such as agriculture, food security, and the water resources management. However, climate change can also be seen as an opportunity for Africa to address some of its most pressing development issues. That is why, in ECA, we have called for deliberate action on green industrialization as a means of addressing the continent's energy, water, and food security challenges, which the negative impacts of climate change have accentuated. We believe that Africa has a tremendous opportunity now to shape the type of industrialization path it chooses so that it can be part of the sustainable development solution without having to forfeit its right to industrialize. Green industrialization, we believe, offers this choice, and if resolutely implemented by African countries, would offer incredible investment opportunities and real dividends. Now, of course, we cannot talk about productive integration in our continent without addressing the investment dimensions of our structural transformation strategic vision. Africa attracts investors because it has a big domestic market that is also growing. We have a lot of natural resources, and we also have a lot of labor. Investors' perception of Africa as an investment destination is also constantly improving. Today, Africa is the second most attractive investment decision. You will agree that investments are crucial for economic development as they contribute to development by fueling growth, employment, and more generally, economic dynamism. In particular, in Africa, the investment gap is a major obstacle for development and economic progress. More investments are needed for both infrastructure and private sector development. So, over the next 3 days, we are going to dig deeper into all the issues that I have mentioned before you, and it is my sincere hope that your active participation and contribution is going to be essential for us to be able to get guidance on the way forward. This committee meeting is a platform where we can exchange ideas, share experiences, and give advice to one another on issues of importance, such as regional integration, Africa's productive capacity, inclusive growth, and structural transformation. So, Mr. Chairman, distinguished delegates, I am looking forward to 3 fruitful days of this committee, and allow me to take once again this opportunity to thank you for your participation and also for your attention, and wish you a highly successful meeting. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Directeur de l'intégration régionale du commerce et du développement. La commission. Merci pour cet important message que vous venez de délivrer. La densité de votre message est assez remarquable et le message ne manquera pas d'inspirer nos travaux pendant les 3 prochains jours où nous serons réunis ici. À présent, je voudrais inviter Madame la directrice du département de l'industrie et du commerce de la Commission de l'Union africaine, ici présente, à nous livrer son message. Madame, vous avez la parole.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. I would like to recognize our Honorable Chairperson of the Bureau and members of the Regional Cooperation and Regional Integration Committee. I'd like to recognize my distinguished colleague, Dr. Stephen Karingi, Director at the UNECA. I would like to also recognize here present honorable ambassadors and representatives of African Union member states and representatives of regional economic communities. I also would like to recognize representatives of the UN family and other multilateral agencies here present. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, all protocol is observed. On behalf of the African Union Commission, it gives me a great pleasure to welcome all of you to Addis Ababa on the occasion of the opening session of the Statutory Committee on Regional Cooperation and Integration, taking place for the next 3 days. I bring warm greetings from Her Excellency, Commissioner for Trade and Industry, Fatima Haram Asil, who unfortunately was unable to join this important meeting due to other duties of the Commission. She has requested me to deliver this statement on her behalf. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Stephen Karingi and the UNECA executives for inviting the African Union Commission to share some thoughts with you on the theme of enhancing productive integration for Africa's structural transformation. As the African Union Commission and the Department of Trade and Industry in particular, we appreciate and value the seamless cooperation and collaborative working relations between our teams as we serve member states to implement, monitor, and evaluate the key decisions taken by our policy organs. During my address, I will highlight a few key policy areas and reflect on progress made, as well as indicate some of the challenges and opportunities which lie ahead as we continue to strive to achieve our common goals and objectives for the benefit of our beloved continent. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, The transformation of African economies to create shared growth, decent jobs, and economic opportunities for all is part of the priorities of the new vision of the continent that was proclaimed by the heads of state and government of the African Union in their 50th anniversary solemn declaration in 2013. I think we are all aware that since then, the Agenda 2063, which is our global strategy to optimize the use of Africa's resources for the benefits of all Africans, is a framework that defines comprehensively the Africa we want, which is envisioning together the attainment of an integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa driven by its own citizens and representing a global force, a dynamic force in the global arena. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, industrialization, has been mentioned by the earlier statement, has been identified as one of the key pillars that will drive the social and economic structural transformation in the next 50 years through the beneficiation and value addition of natural resources, amongst other important policy initiatives. Now, perhaps one speaks to the converted, but the question always arises, why must Africa industrialize? Well, first of all, during the past decade, African economies have displayed their potential for achieving exceptional performance, sometimes under very trying circumstances. However, despite this progress, it is not established that this growth has improved the living standards of the people on the continent as a whole. Africa remains the poorest, African countries remain amongst the poorest in the world, and according to the UNECA 2013 Economic Report on Africa, although Africa's growth exceeded the world average in the 2000s, it did not translate into the commensurate poverty reduction at a time when poverty elsewhere fell heavily, skewing the global picture. And similarly, the global dispersion of production has led to unequal benefits. And what we notice that most of the benefits have accrued to East and Southeast Asian economies, especially China. As you know, African countries have not yet been capable to sustainably transform their industrial base. African industries remain, sadly, today the least competitive and productive in the world. The output of manufacturing industries, that is measured by value added as a share of GDP, remains around 12% in Africa, while it rose from 34% to 39% in China. I just give this as an indication that indeed Africa has a great deal to do in order to catch up on industrial development. Despite this deficit, I wish to also share with you, distinguished participants, another reality that is indeed very disturbing, and that is that Africa is in fact deindustrializing. And that means that basically the share of manufacturing has been falling contrary to the structural economic transformation industrialization trajectory of some parts of the world, such as East Asia or Latin America. And as mentioned by Dr. Stephen Karingi in his statement, less than 10% of job creation is in the manufacturing sector. That is skill technology and innovation based. So what we see as a result is we have enterprises which are less competitive to integrate into the global value chains. And yet, all the studies have stated that industrialization is the main leverage which allows countries to move from a primary economy to a secondary economy, one that is based on solid pillars for development. Indeed, as a country industrializes its economies, it absorbs the labor force more effectively into higher income industrial jobs. Now, these facts, as much as they are known, also underscore as something that is evident, and that is that most industrialized countries in the world are in fact amongst the richest. Now, if we go back in history and recall that during the 10th African Union Assembly held here in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, in January 2008, devoted to Africa's industrialization, heads of state and government underlined their engagement to stimulate industrialization in Africa by stating the following, and I quote, "No country or region in the world has achieved prosperity and a decent socio-economic life for its citizens without the development of a robust industrial sector, I close quote. And on this occasion, we witnessed the launch of the Action Plan for Accelerated Industrial Development of Africa, which we refer to as IDA. Despite the ambitious objectives of IDA and the agreement of both African leaders and international stakeholders on the main role of industrialization as an effective policy elimination measure, nearly 7 years after its launch, the resources mobilization for its implementation remains its main challenge. We need to do more to prioritize the mobilization of resources for industrial development, infrastructure development, and to ensure that we have the necessary skills to compete in the global arena. The ministers of industry have also identified 3 priority sectors for us to focus on as we focus on our industrial development agenda, namely the importance of agro-industry, and due to its importance for food and nutrition security, the pharmaceuticals industry due to its importance for affordable medicines, and the mineral resources sector in order to advance commodity-based industrialization, value addition, and to also ultimately reduce the exposure that African economies have to volatile commodity prices. We wish to note that there is, through the close collaboration between the African Union Commission and the African Minerals Development Center on the sector of mineral resources, we are starting to see some progress recorded, with increasingly more countries requesting support for the development of country mining vision frameworks, which are inspired by the Africa Mining Vision and the Action Plan, which has been adopted by the heads of state and government. We also are fully aware, all of us, of the tremendous work that has gone into the CAADP framework in order to advance our work in terms of enhancing the potential that we have for agricultural development. And we also have the Pharmaceutical Action Plan, which has been under implementation, led by the Department of Social Affairs in the African Union Commission, working with a number of stakeholders. I'm sure some of you are here. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we are meeting at a critical moment in our history. As we meet now, you will recall that our heads of state and government took a bold decision to launch the Continental Free Trade Area negotiations in Johannesburg at the summit in June. The summit, as you will recall, adopted a set of documents that will guide the Continental Free Trade Area negotiations, these being the objectives and guiding principles for the CFTA negotiations, the institutional arrangements for the negotiations, the terms of reference for the CFTA negotiations, as well as the indicative roadmap for the CFTA negotiations. Now, by agreeing to negotiate a comprehensive and mutually beneficial free trade agreement, our leaders have signaled to the world that Africa is indeed ready for business. The launch of the CFTA negotiations, as you are all aware, were preceded by the launch of the tripartite free trade area in the resort town of Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. The establishment, therefore, of the Continental Free Trade Area is a strategic necessity for the continent. And as the African Union Commission, we are convinced that the future of this continent lies in regional integration. We must therefore make regional integration work for every country, large and small. And every country must eventually benefit from the regional integration that we aspire to achieve. And although uneven, we wish to recognize the significant progress that has been made by the regional economic communities working under the leadership of member states to foster integration across all the regions in our continent. And it is indeed also true that we believe that the functional regional trade arrangements that are in place will provide a strong basis for the establishment of the Continental Free Trade Area. And it is also important to recall that the CFTA is part of the continent's development framework, Agenda 2063, which is rooted in Pan-Africanism and the African Renaissance, aimed at the realization of this, making sure that we seize the 21st century as the African century. So as one of the priority projects for Agenda 2063, the CFTA is indeed part of the first 10-year implementation plan, together with other complementary initiatives such as the high-speed train network, the African passport, and free movement of people, as well as the implementation of the Yamoussoukro decision on the unification of African airspace, the Grand Inga Dam, and there are many others. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it has long been realized that simply reducing tariffs and removing other barriers to trade may not necessarily lead to intra-African trade. We must do more in terms of developing the productive capacities of our continent, implement trade facilitation measures, develop our infrastructure, and ensure reliable energy supplies and skill availability. Simply put, as earlier stated, our economies must be globally competitive, and our policies must respond to the challenges that business in Africa face when doing cross-border trade and investment in the continent and with the rest of the world. That is why the January 2012 Summit Heads of State and Government decision endorsed an action plan on boosting intra-African trade, and then decided on the establishment of the CFTA by the indicative date of 2017. I just wish to remind us that the action plan has 7 clusters, and I just want to mention them so that you can get the indication of the scope of this action plan. It has 7 clusters, including trade policy, trade facilitation, productive capacity, trade-related infrastructure, trade finance, trade information, and factor market integration. It is our belief that if we develop and implement projects in each of these clusters, intra-African trade will increase substantially by the next decade. It is also critical for us to leverage of the work done by UNECA to monitor the progress that is being made by our member states and regional economic communities on implementing the Boosting Intra-African Trade Action Plan. And in this regard, we welcome the Regional Integration Index, as well as the annual ARIA publications, and other tools that are provided by ECA to enable us to report to our policy organs based on the evidence that has been gathered. I wish to also indicate that the Department of Trade and Industry is working on a project to establish an African Trade Observatory, which will enhance our own capacities to collect, analyze, and disseminate relevant information to our key stakeholders. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, as we are nearing the end of this year, we are very conscious of the fact that the time or the clock is ticking for the indicative deadline of 2017. And we wish to use this occasion to request all of us gathered here to summon our energies and to continue the work ahead before us. Member states have agreed that the CFTA should include a trade in goods, trade in services, investment, intellectual property rights, and competition. For us to deliver on all these elements, we must put in place an efficient and effective mechanism for the CFTA negotiations. It is in this regard that the Commission is in the process of setting up a CFTA negotiation support unit within the Department of Trade and Industry. The unit will strengthen the technical capacity of the department to effectively support member states in carrying out these negotiations. We are also equally seized with the process of working on the implementation of the roadmap, which includes several stakeholder consultations at a regional level, including with the Pan-African Parliament, the private sector, and other civil society and other key stakeholders. And we are also seized with the process of preparing for the inaugural session for the CFTA negotiations, which is scheduled tentatively for the 3rd week of February in 2016. In this regard, I would like to urge all AU member states represented here to also work with the Commission to ensure that the necessary preparations are undertaken at the national level in order to engage at the continental process of negotiating. And as I conclude the statement, I wish to recall that next week is going to be a key week on the international trade agenda, where Africa will be proud to host the 10th WTO Ministerial Conference in Nairobi, Kenya. We are very proud as the African Union Commission to join with other African countries to support this event and to ensure its successful outcome. And for Africa, and to working together with ECA, we have held 2 preparatory meetings, informal ministerial sessions with the ministers of trade to consolidate and agree on a common position for Africa at the WTO or at MC10. And in this regard, we are looking forward to seeing Africa showing its solidarity and working with the rest of the world to define the priorities beyond Nairobi in the years to come. And as I conclude, the distinguished ladies and gentlemen, let me take this opportunity to thank all of you here, specifically the member states, stakeholders, and partners who are working closely with the regional economic communities, United Nations agencies, multilateral organizations, and especially UNECA, because with the support that you have provided, we see that we are making progress step by step as a continent. Your support is highly appreciated, and it is together that we will build the Africa we want for Africa as targeted by Agenda 2063. And with these few remarks, I would like to thank you once again and wish you a fruitful deliberations over the next 3 days, and I thank you for your kind attention.
Merci, Madame la directrice du département de l'industrie et du commerce de la Commission de l'Union africaine. Merci pour cette importante adresse à l'endroit de notre auguste Assemblée. Merci pour le rappel des défis restants à relever sur le chemin du développement de notre cher continent. Mesdames et messieurs honorables délégués, nous avons eu droit ce matin à 2 importantes allocutions qui plantent le décor de nos travaux. Je voudrais vous remercier pour votre attention soutenue jusqu'à présent. Et maintenant, nous allons marquer une pause. Cette pause, nous allons la mettre à profit pour engager les consultations préalables à la mise en place du bureau de la 9e session. Pour ce faire, je voudrais inviter les services compétents de notre session à venir donner les orientations aux honorables délégués. Merci.
Mr. Chairman, with your permission, let me guide the session on the process of the constitution of the Bureau for our meeting. The Bureau for the last session that we held in 2013, the President was West Africa, represented by Benin, who is chairing this opening session. The first Vice Chair was North Africa, represented by Algeria. The second Vice Chair was Southern Africa, represented by Malawi. The third Vice Chair was Eastern Africa, represented by Uganda. And the rapporteur was Gabon. Now, based on the principle of rotation, the proposed 9th session bureau would be as follows. The chair would be North Africa. The first vice chair would be Southern Africa. The second vice chair would be Eastern Africa. The third vice chair would be Central Africa. And the rapporteur would be West Africa. So we would like to request the delegates who are representing North Africa to meet and decide on the basis of their consultation the country that will become the chair of the 9th session, and then the countries from Southern Africa to meet and on the basis of consultation give us the name of the country that will be the first vice chair. Eastern Africa will give us the second vice chair. Central Africa will give us the third vice chair. And we would also want the West African countries to consult and give us the name of the rapporteur. Thank you very much.
Merci, Monsieur le Directeur. C'est bon? Merci. Nous savons ce qui nous attend, donc nous allons nous retirer et nous regrouper par région, histoire de dégager les candidats pour les différents postes qui viennent d'être annoncés. Cela devrait pouvoir se faire rapidement, nous en avons l'habitude. Et donc, dans combien de temps? Okay. Donc, pendant une quinzaine de minutes, nous allons nous retrouver. Et 15 minutes après, nous nous revoyons ici pour communiquer les fruits de nos échanges. Merci.